Tonight, a little bit of everything on RFL. A look back at the Anthony Baez case. Deadly police encounter happened 3 days before Christmas, and tonight his mother tells RFL that life has never been the same.
So are you telling us that Christmas is a nightmare for you?
Well, almost it is. If it's not for my other babies, you know, it is a nightmare.
And tonight, we're also hearing from Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, what the former police officer turned politician has to say about the police-community relations in his borough and in New York, let alone across this country. Plus, potential indictments may be coming down soon in the Bridgegate scandal, as reports have cleared Governor Christie of any wrongdoing. But what could these indictments mean for his administration and a potential run for the White House? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. And tonight, we will begin with a look across this country where protesters are storming the streets for yet another day, speaking out against grand jury's decision in the Staten Island case surrounding Eric Garner and, of course, with the overtones of Ferguson, Missouri. Now, the protesters were also speaking out against police community violence and the countless senseless killings of civilians at the hands of police officers, they argue. Protesters marching outside of the Capitol today, carrying signs that bear the names of African Americans who were killed by police officers. And the New York Times recently profiled some of the most notable police-related deaths that the city has seen since 1990. Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, Eric Garner, Akai Gurley, among the dozen names that were featured, along with Anthony Baez. For those who don't remember the story, 29-year-old Anthony Baez was killed on December 22, 1994. Baez was playing football outside of his mother's home in the Bronx when the ball they were throwing landed on a police car. An NYPD officer put Baez in a chokehold while trying to arrest him, and Mr. Baez died. Today, Dominic Carter, he spoke exclusively with Iris Baez, Anthony Baez's mother. Dominic?
Well, Richard, we can tell you that the officer involved, Francis Lavoti, that was charged for choking Mr. Baez, cleared in local charges, but convicted by the feds of civil rights violations, and he did a civil rights violation, and he did 7 years in prison. Now, Anthony Baez's mother, she has never gotten over what happened to her son. She says, as you just saw, that Christmas is a nightmare. And tonight, I want to show that video again that you showed a little earlier in terms of the mural that is of her son on the side of her home. You're looking at her, obviously, there. And also, the city of New York even changed the name of the street officially to Anthony Baez Place. Iris Baez says looking at the video of Eric Garner is like going over her son's death all over again. Mrs. Baez, we thank you for joining us tonight. I know it has to be terribly difficult. It almost relives what happened to your son, Anthony Baez. When you saw in the Garner case that there was no indictment, what went through your mind?
Here we go all over again. You know, throwing out the indictments. First from the judge, here's a jury, they threw out the indictment. And when I heard that we didn't see what we saw on TV, that was just like, they're gonna throw it out.
When you say you didn't see what you saw, you're referring to the Garner video?
Yes, the Garner video.
When you saw that video, as a mother, how did you feel?
I felt that was my son being stepped on the floor, because like the kids told me, that my son was dragged on the floor, Garner was dragged on the floor. They said, my husband said he choked him, they choked Garner. You know, so it's all over again. So I was just like looking at my son being choked all over again.
Now, let me give a little perspective on this. 20 years ago, NYPD cop Francis Lavoti was acquitted in your son's death after the football accidentally hit his patrol car. And he was angered that his Officer Lavoti cleared in state court, but then convicted by the feds of a civil rights violation. You know that the feds are now looking at the Garner case. How do you feel about that, and what do you say to the parents to the family of Mr. Garner?
My heart goes out to you, and after everybody goes away, I'm still here. and I'll be here for you. And the federal, well, you have to be careful and keep a good eye on them, because they can turn around with no indictment.
Is it accurate that when it happened with your son, that your husband actually witnessed his own son being choked to death?
Yes, he was begging for my son's life. I telling him, please, he's a sick man, let him go.
And is it also accurate that Anthony Baez was going to return to Florida to be a police officer?
Yes, he was going to be a sheriff.
And how old was your son when this happened?
29 years old.
At the end of the day, do you feel that you've finally received justice?
No, because my son was, what my son got was a civil rights violation, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. But what happened to David and Raymond and all of them that were out there? They got arrested, thrown in jail like criminals.
Your other sons that were there.
And my husband that was, they didn't get justice.
So your other sons out there trying to stop Officer Lavoti ended up being locked up.
Locked up for over 12 hours. And then when they saw that they murdered Anthony, then they let them go. With no charges, no nothing. They just let them go out of the station.
Have you talked to Eric Garner's wife, Esau, and his mother?
Yes, I spoke to them once at the National Action Network.
And what did you say to them?
I sympathize with them. You know, I gave them, my heart goes out to them. And we hugged and we kissed and we exchanged phones.
What has your life been like? The family, the life of your family?
Well, there is no family. You know, there is no family. Like, once they murdered one of your family members, it's like a domino. Everybody's going to fall because they keep on thinking about what happened. Why did it happen? And how did it happen? How did it escalate to this? It's my fault. Everybody's blaming everybody. You know, we barely, you know, like keeping a fist now together because nobody's at fault. The officer that was there and the one with them that allowed this to happen are the guilty ones, not my family.
This happened on December 22nd.
Yes.
What is every Christmas like for your family?
We don't have any more Christmas. If anybody want a Christmas tree, they could go, you know, get it, but not in my house.
You said there's no more Christmas for your family?
I can't. Because, number one, Tony used to be the Santa Claus.
So, what do you do on Christmas every year?
Nothing. I go to bed early and let it pass by.
So, are you telling us that Christmas is a nightmare for you?
Well, almost it is. If it's not for my other babies, you know, it is a nightmare.
Why are you getting emotional now, Mrs. Baez?
Because it brings me back to, he loved Christmas.
Does a mother ever get over something like this?
No, I'm sorry. There's no way nobody could get over it. There's no way.
So how are you able to function every day?
By saying I'm going to clean the system.
So your fight now is against the system?
Yes, it's a system that allows things to happen. It's a system that how could you stand there and see another police murder somebody? It's a human being. If we care for an animal, then we sure got to care for a life.
And with that, let's bring in our panel. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona and also a professor of campaign management at NYU. Jessica Proud, Republican strategist and PR expert with the November Teen. Jessica, recently a spokeswoman for the Astorino gubernatorial campaign. Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And Dominic, who obviously did that interview with the mother. You can still feel that pain 20 plus years later. My question is, Dominic, the parallel in terms of that the feds, it's not just lip service. They can get involved in certain cases, and this being the best example for it. This guy was cleared originally, and then they found that his actions were so egregious. Is this kind of what many people are pointing to as precedent, that maybe in the Garner case there could be something that Washington actually could do if they found that threshold?
That appears to be the case, and it's not just me saying that, Richard. There were large newspaper articles done over the weekend pointing back to the Baez case. It's almost identical in terms of a chokehold, the officer being cleared, and the feds coming in. And so, but the only different dynamic here, and let's be honest about this, the feds under this president, they're not going to take on Michael Brown and Eric Garner. If they take on anything, and that's still a big assumption, it will be one or the other.
Well,
I don't know which one.
They made it sound, Andrew, like they will get involved with the Garner case. Now, maybe at the end of the day, nothing will come of it, but they are investigating it. And you get the sense, especially with the existence of the video that we've all seen, that one in the polls, in fact, that you were showing me some of the numbers, seem to indicate that there'd be, the public at least, would understand if they found at least a threshold to get involved.
Well, to be fair, the Justice Department is investigating the Garner case, and they're also investigating Ferguson. They're both at the same point, the investigatory point. We're not in a determination as to whether they're going to file civil rights charges in either case. It'll take some time on both. But the split of the numbers shows definitely a difference in racial perception of the two cases. Now, in general, more people think that Garner was a miscarriage of justice and that Officer Pantaleo should have gone to prison no matter what race you happen to be. But there's a dramatic split that we see in both.
And just to give an idea, Andrew, for the public, take Republican, Democrat, take the politics out of this. Just white, black here.
That's
it's
the split.
3 to 4 to 1
Yeah.
difference on, at least on the Ferguson case to look at it. A little bit more of a plurality on both, where they thought that a miscarriage was done in Staten Island with the Garner case.
Yeah, the Garner case, because of the video, seems to cross racial lines a little bit more, but there is definitely a split. Far more African Americans seem to think that Pantaleo overstepped his bounds and should have been indicted by the grand jury than think
And
otherwise.
that race was a major factor.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you both, and I'll start with you, Jessica. You see how issues can become movements. Do you get the sense that post-Ferguson and post-Garner, that this is ramping up into something? I took note here that, you have the Rand Pauls of the world as well as the Bill O'Reillys, not the good Bill O'Reilly we know, but the one on Fox, that they're even saying that something's wrong here, this isn't right, that there are 2 levels of justice. Do you get the idea that this is turning into something bigger?
Well, I think, to your point, Andrew, with the Garner case, it does seem to be a little bit different. You had Rush Limbaugh over the weekend coming out and voicing concern, and there are some more questions that are unanswered. And I think there's going to be calls for reform. You had the Attorney General of New York, Eric Schneiderman, come out today and say, well, the cases should be referred to me, which, I don't know is a great idea because he has a political agenda as well. But I think there will be a demand for something to happen, but these things tend to peter out as well. You saw it with Occupy Wall Street and with other protests. So it remains to be seen what will actually happen with it. But I think there is a general consensus that these grand jury investigations are done in such secrecy that it's difficult for the public to make a judgment one way or the other. And we can all sit around the table and say he should have or he shouldn't have been indicted, but the fact is we weren't members of the grand jury and we didn't
saw that
see
video.
You did, but you didn't see
Staten
it
Island.
you didn't see the evidence in its entirety. And I think it's inappropriate to rush to judgment. And when you have these elected officials out there making these kind of inflammatory statements and the media sensation,
I'll buy in Ferguson that
compounds.
there was definitely a contrasting context, but we know the facts of what preceded and what happened in that short window of time in Staten Island. And again, none of us were on the grand jury, but we do know what the medical examiner said. We saw the video. We know what happened afterwards. And I come on a broader question, Gina. I know we're going to go break, but I can draw the parallel to Newtown, in the aftermath of Newtown. We all felt at this table, or at least I felt at this table, that there was certainly going to be change of some kind. The poll showed overwhelmingly people want it. Do you think that this will be more of a process change, more of a perception change, more of a culture change? What change, if any, comes in the aftermath of Garner? And we've got, as we'll talk about next segment, other cases coming down, whether it be in Cleveland or whether it even be in Brooklyn. This is a story that's not going away.
No, it's not going to go away, but it's interesting you mentioned Newtown because you look and what were the real substantive policy changes? In some states like New York, we did see gun control passed. But at the federal level, yeah, Connecticut too. The federal level, we haven't seen that yet. So, the real change that has to happen here is systematic policy change. And, I think the White House has been talking about, and as a point of this commission, some really important steps that can be taken. But in my mind, a lot of that substantive discussion has been lost. So, we really have to think about what are the substantive things that can be done to make these changes.
And there's steps here, and we've talked about body cams, we've talked about comprehensive training that people who are much closer than I do say would make a difference, but they're all incremental steps, and you wonder for the public where they see this as being enough or falling short. But when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. We'll also head to Brooklyn, where a grand jury will consider whether charges should be filed against an NYPD officer accused of accidentally killing a man in the stairwell of a housing complex. After the break, Dominic sits down with the borough president, Eric Adams, who brings a unique perspective. He's a former law enforcement officer himself. We'll hear what he has to say straight ahead.